I get sad when I hear a story of somebody who was a elite level, again, fill in the blank, whatever, 13, 14, all the way to 16. And then by their junior and senior year of high school, they're like, I don't really want to do this anymore, right? Load management was done poorly. We look at early success rates, especially when we're talking very young, and they're not always great predictors of future success. Sport specificity is loosely, at best, shoddy. It's at best iffy. I'll go with that.
Can you give me some of the consequences of specializing early?
I think when we talk about specializing early, it's really important to put some specifics on that, to use that word. It's a very nuanced conversation. If we're talking about specializing in a sport early, we have to talk a little bit about what ages are we talking about here. I think just in general, very young athletes from ages of 12 and under, I think it's still a great idea for them. General advice to sample a lot of sports. I think some of the long-term athlete development models do a good job of outlining the value of that, of understanding a variety of movement skills, being exposed to different playing surfaces. As we start to get older, I think this is where the nuanced part of this conversation comes in. And we start to say, as kids start to get into that later middle school age, maybe even early high school, there are some sports that have such a high technical demand to them that might require an athlete who maybe is lacking some of these physical capabilities and capacities, strength, power, speed, agility, for them to spend more time really mastering some of these technical and tactical elements of that sport just for them to be competitive.
Like swimming, golf.
I think swimming is an example. I think gymnastics, golf. The argument can be made for a lot of those, though. I was a wrestler, and I've had to challenge myself to hear some of the more successful youth wrestling coaches in the area kind of push back on this idea that kids playing other sports is always necessary. And for them to be able to say mat time and mastering some of the technical and tactical areas of the sport, the psychological demands of the sport, I've had to challenge myself to hear their side of that. I don't always agree with it. And I think, again, going back to use that same word again, nuance to this conversation. I think there's several athletes who are strong enough, fast enough, big enough work capacities that they can do multiple sports. And then sometimes we misinterpret that and misevaluate the reason that they had those capacities was because they did those other sports, when I would challenge maybe some people to look at that and go, or was it the other way around? Were they able to do these other sports because they had those physical capacities? And I think the answer to that is yes. And I know that doesn't make any sense because when we look at that and go, it's a case-by-case situation.
What about the ones who said that you have kids who are crushing it when they're younger, but when they get to college, they're not the top performers anymore?
Yeah. I think the numbers speak for themselves, right? We look at early success rates, especially when we're talking very young, and they're not always great predictors of future success. And I think a lot of times that's challenging for parents. I'm a parent of two young men who are playing sports right now, and we always have to ground ourselves, my wife and I, making sure that we recognize this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. Don't get overzealous about early success. Or on the other side of that, lack of early success. That's not always a great predictor of future success either. So, I just think. Again, the numbers don't speak for itself. We see the fact that a lot of our elite level performers at the collegiate level and professional level did play a lot of sports early, but it kind of goes back to maybe the argument there. We could go round and round. Some people might go like, well, they were already very, very strong, fast, big, giant work capacities, whatever skill set might have lent itself to that sport. And that's why they were able to do that. So I just think it's easy to get wrapped up in and the fear of missing out, right? If you have an elite fill in the blank, whatever, you feel like you're going to miss out if you're not on the travel league in the off season or year-round competition examples. And I would encourage parents and coaches in those areas working with youth athletes to keep themselves grounded in the fact of like, this is a marathon, this isn't a sprint, and there's other things we should be developing with them as well.
Yeah, that's interesting when you said FOMO because Chris Wojcik, right? He's a strength coach for he's a strength coach for swimmers.
Yep.
At Pikes Peak. And he said that, yeah, for them who trains, like they train the kids, and if they're doing it the right way, they're not going to be top performers at that age. But there are some clubs where they have super, super fast swimmers, but their training age lasts maybe like till 16 or 17 because they're not the top. They don't even go to D1 anymore because they're just burnt.
Right. I think, and that's really sad, especially when we consider the population we're talking about right now. Burnout happens. And if you walk away from this thing when you're 22 years old, 23 years old, after a competitive collegiate career, maybe even a professional career, it happens. I get sad when I hear a story of somebody who was a elite level, again, fill in the blank, whatever, 13, 14, all the way to 16. And then by their junior and senior year of high school, they're like, I don't really want to do this anymore, right? Load management was done poorly. Choices of competition, schedules, missing out on opportunities to be around friends and social opportunities because we're over competing. I think those are sad stories. And there's, unfortunately, there's too many of them.
With your high school, because you coach high school, right?
Correct.
What are some of the fixes that you, or are you fixing anything in your high school?
It's tough, man. And it's gotten harder and harder because of this issue that we're talking about. A really good coach that did some coach education for us once said, when considering the things our parents are doing, our sport parents are doing, the phrase he used was a misapplication of love. And so in terms of framing, like their intentions aren't bad, their intentions aren't malicious. They're quite the opposite. They want the best for their kid, right? And so let's just take, for example, the young man or young woman who can't get into the strength and conditioning program or has sporadic training sessions at best because they're traveling to the U16 national tournament, this, that, or the other, or they're seeing a private coach on the outside, and they're getting thrown all of these things at them that I just find unnecessary at best at that age. I have to remind myself, like, it's coming from a good place. Those parents want what's best for their kid or what they think is best for their kid. It might just be a lack of really understanding and education. I try to communicate those things. I still do. There are some circumstances where I got to throw my hands up in the air and just move forward, do the best I can with them. I think in terms of fixing, I think quality program design, offering them an experience there to train around those things, to better suit them, to be able to handle those demands that are being thrown at them. So to give you an example, right off the top of the bat right there, getting strong is a great layer of protection against a lot of overuse.
Getting strong early.
Just getting strong early, yeah. And even when we're talking about, I'll have athletes come to me right now in the class right now. We've had a couple of kids that first time in the program are juniors, right? So 17 years old. For whatever reason, couldn't get a class on their schedule, or just didn't want one. Maybe it took some time to get convinced. It's never too late to start. Obviously, earlier is better, but it's never too late for them to start getting strong. And I think that just puts a layer of protection against a lot of the demands that they're seeing, whether it be in the pool, on the diamond. You fill in the blank, whatever sport they're doing, and the amount of travel and excessive training work that's going into what they think is needed to be done to be elite performers, quote unquote. I think just getting strong right there helps layer that protection against them. Moving well is another area that we really try to address, right? Addressing any concerns in terms of restrictions of mobility, flexibility. I think done well, I think we can touch on those things. Although, again, I think in terms of priority, I'm talking like number one level, I think get strong. It sounds kind of raw and a little bit meatheadish, but I think you can't go wrong getting strong. Rick Howard does a lot of work in the LTAD space, and I think it's him that talks about you can't go wrong with strong. And I think that's an easy place for starting with, especially when we're talking about like fixing or working around this issue that we're talking about with youth athletes.
Well, we're getting strong involves weightlifting, right? I know when we were growing up, they said if you're young, you shouldn't be lifting weights because your growth is going to be stunted. Or like,
yeah.
Can you talk more about that myth and how, if there's about the studies that debunked it?
Good question. I'm definitely not the best person to go to in terms of citing the studies on bone modeling and stunting growth plates and damage to epiphyseal plates and those things. Those are just the things I'm throwing out there right now. I think if anybody did even a decent search, they could find right now that's probably very much unfounded. The National Strength and Conditioning Association has position statements on training youth athletes, and we'll be able to cite sources that debunk that myth. I'm trying to think of other great resources. I mentioned Rick Howard a little bit earlier. Joe Eisenman is another good follow on social media that they regularly throw things out there. Dr. Andy Galpin actually did.
Andy
Galpin has a whole podcast on training youth, and he talks a little bit. He addresses this one, and he's a brilliant man. He'll be able to cite all the studies and all the physiology and the myths behind behind that and go, it's garbage, right? Saying that you're going to stunt your growth with weightlifting is next to just nonsense. I'm sure there are some extreme examples out there that somebody would point out, outliers, but in general, very safe especially compared to a lot of other sports or a lot of other physical activities. When parents are concerned about their kid being in the weight room, I got to be kind of honest. I kind of laugh to myself when I'm like, they're driving, right? Like, you're letting your 17-year-old drive right now with a cell phone, but you're concerned about them getting under a landmine push press, and so I mean, that's not always the best selling point, but I say that to myself sometimes. Like, that's comparatively a very safe place. So if we go back to that, fortunately, I think that one's losing some steam. When we were kids, you're right? There was concern about stunting growth or
Your ball shrinking.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we had everything under the sun was trying to avoid just putting in the work. I will say, I mean, even some common, if we're going down the myths rabbit hole right here, we still had basketball players not wanting to lift. It was going to throw off their shot. Right? Do you remember that one? And we know now, like, this is one piece of the puzzle, right? If we're talking about performance, there's really 4 big pillars or buckets, if you will. And there's physical, psychological, technical, and tactical. And so in the physical, we're really kind of unpacking that one a lot right now. Just right now, that's strength, power, speed, agility, mobility, all of the things that we do in these cool facilities, right? But there's other areas that have to be addressed as well. I think, just to go maybe dig deeper into the myth, which could potentially be true, if all you did was lift weights, if all you did was strength training, you never got on the court, you never practiced that technical skill of shooting a basketball, then you probably would lose proficiency in that area. And I don't think we could blame the weight room, but we would blame your lack of sport-specific training. Right? And sport-specific training is, in that case, shooting a basketball. It's not dribbling a basketball while you do lunges. I've had that request before. I use that example all the time. I've had a coach request that we needed to be more sport-specific in the weight room. And one of the recommendations was that we would have a basketball in our hand while we did lunges. So
interesting.
Yeah.
You said 4 pillars. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Like, you said strength. What's the next one?
Yeah. So physical. And that would include strength, right? That would include
physical,
power. That would, if we really wanted to nerd out on that, we're talking about rate of force development and all of these cool things, right? But then we would go psychological. What's my ability to handle the stress of the sport, right? How aroused can I get, or how well can I manage that level of arousal? Nerves, right? The sports psychology standpoint of that. Technical, right? Can I do the actual sport specific skill? And this is where our sport coaches come in. This is where I go, even with a background and got to wrestle at the collegiate level. This is where I hand off that to our wrestling coach. He's far more versed in teaching specific wrestling skills. So I'm going to stay out of that. I'm going to stay in my lane, right? And then we talk about the tactical side of that. Can I understand what's going on in the game, race, or match? Right? What decisions do I need to make in there? And so again, these are all areas that we have people that are well-versed in those areas at. And so anytime somebody steps out of their lane a little bit, I cringe a little bit about that, even when it's strength and conditioning professionals moving into that technical, tactical sport space. So yeah, those big 4 pillars: physical, psychological, technical, and tactical. And I didn't create that. That's from somebody far more intelligent than me. I think the first time I heard it referenced was Dr. Fergus Connolly. I can't remember where he's working at now, but he's definitely in the space of high-level performance programs.
That's pretty cool. Let's step back a little bit, because I know this can relate to like generational gaps pretty much, right? What do you think's the difference between, our generation compared to, the newer generation when it comes to like movement ability and stuff like that?
I think it's still strength. I really do. I think, and here's what I have to do here is I have to qualify this statement in saying I grew up in a small town, a rural community where a lot of my classmates, myself included, I grew up in 4-H. I grew up in an agricultural setting where one of my first jobs was bucking hayfields, right? Picking up bales of hay, digging post holes, doing a lot of manual labor, carrying wheelbarrows and heavy feed bags, water buckets. And so at a very early age, 10 years and younger, we were doing some of these physically demanding things. And so just developing levels of strength early was something that we were naturally a little just better than. I have to remind myself I'm coaching in a much different circumstance, not just generationally, but geographically. Discovery Canyon campus is obviously it's in Colorado Springs. It's a far stretch from hayfields, and technologically, I don't even know if they have double string bales anymore. It's even when I go home, it's all these big round bales and machinery, and so I think going back to your question, when I came into Discovery Canyon, I'd come from both Olympic training centers, University of New Mexico, prior to that, the Air Force Academy. So I was already working with some elite level athletes and just didn't have a great understanding of what I was going to walk into 18 years ago at Discovery Canyon. We started with freshmen, and I'll just be real honest with you. We were very weak. We just weren't very strong individuals. Even things that people sometimes, I talk to other strength coaches and we talk about, I had to change the collars on our bars. We weren't strong enough to close the old spring collars and put our weights on. Picking up 45-pound plates, I had to make sure that all of those were at a certain setting so we weren't getting down on the ground, and our bumper plate widths, so just grip strength, general strength, moving barbells in and out. Those are little things that I think kids that grew up in rural settings or even just in generationally outside playing more, early sports sampling. I think, to just a quick, simple answer to that is strength. I think an appreciation for the training process. We just had a little better understanding of, I don't want to say hard work, because there are still some kids now that very much understand that. But we weren't pushed in as many different directions. Again, when we grew up, there wasn't maybe, especially in the town I grew up in, there wasn't year-round wrestling opportunities. There definitely wasn't a travel baseball, volleyball, fill in the blank. So these kids are being pulled in much different directions. And so maybe there's just not, it's a symptom of not having the time to really buy into a training system and appreciate that long-term process of training to improve these physical capabilities to ultimately position themselves to maybe experience some high levels of success. So everything's different. One thing I will say though, and I can't remember where I heard this. I was thinking about this on the drive down, thinking we would maybe discuss this. Because we hear a lot of times like, well, kids just don't pay attention as well anymore. And I think there's actually some studies that go to talking about referencing people our age's ability to pay attention or to stay on task versus kids now, and there's not a discernible difference.
Interesting.
Yeah, I feel like it's, I could be wrong here. You'd have to fact check me on this one, but I heard Adam Grant reference this. He referenced a study on this. It's kids' level of motivation to pay attention now. So, and I thought about this deeply when I heard it, and I think I do think it's where I heard this from was in an Adam Grant conversation. And I thought about it and I go like, when I create a lesson or when I'm talking about a point in my strength and conditioning class, if I've done a great job drawing a connection that'll motivate them, whether it be this is going to make you run faster and win more games, races, or matches, or drawing a connection to strengths, value, and long-term health and fitness, and maybe draw a connection to its preventative benefits to Alzheimer's and cognitive health, and maybe draw a connection to someone that they know and love who's going through dementia. And you just see them. You see these kids, they'll lock in, right? They can still pay attention. But I had to create that moment of motivation or interest for them to really lock in to hear that content. If I'm doing a terrible job with that, of course they're going to squirrels watching shiny objects going by. And I don't know that that's necessarily a generational thing.
So the fact that, we grew up without without screens, and we're playing outside all the time. Because I grew up in the Philippines, and we didn't have that tech.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so it's, I'm like 36. So
okay, yeah, we're close, 45.
We're close. Yeah. So it's like kind of similar.
Yep.
Similar, right? So now that you're saying that, maybe we have to actually like relook at what it's actually just a, what's it called? It's a guess that they don't have a lot of attention, or maybe it's just us not being good enough to get their attention.
There you go. I look at that and go like, am I copying out? Am I copying out by saying, well, these kids these days? I try to hold myself accountable to not being that old man, just being grouchy about and regularly referencing kids these days. And I also have to look at and examine like, well, where are they learning some of this behavior from? And it could be from their environment. It could be from the screens. It could also be at home. Either way, it's still my responsibility as a coach and as an educator work around these things. Do a great job of motivating them. Work around this, not cop out with, well, it's just kids these days.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you have like a certain example or like a certain tactic that you employ when you're in the weight room to like grab their attention?
Yeah. It really kind of depends on what we're doing and what we're talking about there. And I've played with, over 18 years, I've played with different ways of presenting them information. Martin Rooney does a great job of explaining, like, for kids to be, they're only going to match my level of intensity. They're not going to rise above it, right? So if my level of intensity is really low, I can expect my athletes and my class to be even lower. And so right out of the bat, I really want to make sure that my class understands that I feel like this is important. I'm going to be very passionate about whatever we're doing that day. I mean, even if it's just us getting mobilized to get the thing done, or if it's getting under a heavy trap bar and really getting after it, right? Running maximal level flying tens, for example. I've got to convey that level of intensity and importance. Otherwise, they won't match that. For someone else to be on fire, I've got to be burning, right? I've got to be on fire. Martin Rooney, I think I may have mixed up that quote in there, but he does a great job. He's a great follower in terms of talking about creating a presence, creating an environment for our clients, for our athletes to really step up to that. So right out of the bat, I would say that's a good example. I hope that anybody that walks into my class or an after-school program or summer program goes like, Coach Mel, as they call me, he's ready to go. Like, he's not going to have a day where he's sleeping on this. I got to remind myself, this might be the most important part of their day. And even though I've coached at that point, maybe sometimes 130 athletes when that next group walks in, it's their first time. So I better bring it, right? I better have that my juices going. I better be caffeinated up, right? I gotta be ready to go. So right off the bat, it doesn't matter how good my selling point is on whatever that content is. If I'm sitting there and I'm dragging my feet, or I look like I'm half asleep, I can't expect those kids or anybody in that case to rise up to that. So yeah, I'd say that in general is a big one right through there. Right now, just to give you a little bit more specific things, some of the things we're doing right now is strategically working in some of our rest periods and up on the wall next to our weight room. And this is something I'm talking about now because I think it's so cool. It's working out really well. We've only started doing it the last few months, is finding quality infographics or even designing infographics. I'm trying to extend myself to use AI to help generate infographics off of peer-reviewed research and just create a visually appealing infographic. And we place it on the wall. And let's say in between a set of heavy trap bar deadlifts or whatever it might be, if you're not tasked with loading your partner up or spotting your partner, they'll go to the wall there and they'll get some information. And so rather than at the end when they're just completely crushed after a workout, if it's a hard day or for whatever reason not willing to listen to an extended speech from me, maybe sometimes they'll go up to the wall and be like, oh, okay, that's what my urine color should look like. We're talking about hydration right now. One of the infographics has different levels of what urine should look like while hydrated. And so just throwing that up there right now, just again, trying to work around with the ways kids learn, right? Some kids are visual learners, some kids are auditory learners. And that's ultimately my job as an educator. So yeah, hope that helps give some examples of working around generational differences in motivation.
That's pretty cool because they're not just getting stronger physically, but mentally as well, and or intellectually, because they're learning all that stuff.
For sure, man. I think about this a lot, and maybe one of the differences in what I do and maybe some of your other guests is I've said this before. It sounds cheesy. I stole this from my dad. I grew up around 4-H. I grew up around livestock projects. Something my dad said that I stole from. I heard this multiple times when I was a little kid. Is he would say, "We're not raising livestock animals. We're raising kids." And I've taken that to what we're doing in the weight room. And again, sounds corny, but I really believe this. It's helped me out a lot. I'm not trying to create the best program. I'm trying to create the best kid, right? I'm trying to create the best young man or young woman. So there is a lot of educational pieces to that. And if again, different people working in this profession, maybe that's not as big of a concern. I would encourage anybody working with young athletes, though, to keep that in mind. Like they're very moldable at this age. What we say and what we do in front of them is really going to matter. I think both of us can probably reference people that were really instrumental. We were talking about Dr. Dellum earlier. I mean, I was already in college when that happened, and Dr. Dellum was so instrumental to me. So when you're young, I mean, even if we extended that to the early 20s, we're tasked with a lot. You're not just trying to make their rate of force development go up. Right. If they can walk away, kids that come back to me now I've been there for a long time, kids come back to me and Rarely do they reference a coach. Remember when my vertical jump, or my strength speed versus my speed strength, and they never talk about those things. They talk about perseverance. They talk about lessons that they learned. They talk about the fact that they're still working out, and their wife is working out. And now their kids are starting to do some rough and tumbling, getting involved in some sports and some fitness. So again, we're tasked with a lot more than just those seemingly simple things of physical development, working with young athletes.
Yeah, for us in the CrossFit level 1, they taught that they're teaching us to, like, they're telling us that we're the swim coaches. Doctors are the lifesavers. So in this environment that we have right now, where, don't quote me on this, but I think a regular American male can't do 10 consecutive push-ups, something like that, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's accurate.
Yeah,
I
and
wouldn't be
like,
surprised.
and obesity is pretty high, and people are, I know that Ozempic is helping a lot of people, but we got a lot of work to do. So our job right now, it's pretty important, if you ask me.
I would agree. And I think that's something that keeps us grounded. I think it's something that keeps us remembering how important it is to show up every day and give the best possible experience, because we're really the first line of defense against some of those things we're talking about. I think that's important to keep in mind. We're the first line of defense. I can't remember who said this well. I mean, referencing a lot of things that I'm like, I know I heard this from somebody smarter than me. It was like, you even a healthy adult goes and sees their primary care physician for 15 minutes in an annual checkup. Right here in this gym, they're going to be in here 12 times that amount within 1 week, right? You're going to have a lot more exposure to those people in here. My classrooms are block schedules, 80-minute classes with change out, and sometimes I get them 3 times a week. So you can do the math on that. We're going to see them a lot more. And not to say that we have the same level of expertise in dealing with illness, and again, staying in your lane is important, but we might be the first line of defense and just establishing behaviors that become habits for lifelong health and fitness are incredibly important.
Yeah. Let's talk about the good stuff. Training.
Let's get to it.
Yeah, just to preface stuff, you said offline that you train like 65 kids. And to me, 15 here at the gym is like, I get nervous with 15. With 65, how do you do it? Give me the blow-by-blow, tactic strategies. How do you already said keeping their attention, but like, how do you train them properly and so on?
You got it, man. I love that you brought this up, because I would say this is one of my strongest suits as a strength and conditioning professional. Like, if we really just get down to the nitty gritty of what's going on in the weight room, improving that physical side of that pillar. So to give you a little bit of context here, to give listeners a little bit of context, it depends on the setup. It depends on if it's a classroom and if it's a single class. Our counselors are really good about keeping our classes at manageable size. So when I have a class that's just me coaching, it's going to be capped at about 28. So that's a pretty average class size. Sometimes they get a little bit smaller depending on the level of class and academic scheduling. But let's just say for the planning purposes here, 28 when I'm by myself. I'm really fortunate right now to have a full-time assistant. One of the NSCA's foundation assistantships was awarded to a young lady who's working with me now. So I'm pretty fortunate to have a qualified assistant with me. At Discovery Canyon, I'm also really fortunate to have another full-time PE teacher. Our volleyball coach is a great helper in the weight room, has been with me for a long time. We've actually gone into pairing classes together, so we can have 2 classes of 28. So now we're starting to talk about 56. And when it's her and I together, that's a little bit different. We can manage our room. We can use some other available spaces if the gym is available, if the wrestling room next door is available. If it's not, things are going to get a little tight, right? And we got to do a great job of planning. Moving all the way to the end of about 65, now we're talking summertime. In the summertime, we will have groups where we try to cap the registration at about 87, 90 kids, with the hopes that there's going to be about 70% attendance, because when 65 of them show up, man, it's all hands on deck. And so at that point, last summer, I believe we had 7 assistants helping my program. We had between in any given 1 month of training, we had a June session and a July session, and both of those were right around the 350 mark from grades 6 through 12. So they're split up across different sessions, but our big groups would get into that 65-person range. Right off the bat, number one thing is supervision and safety. So I have to organize the room to account for that. And I think I did a presentation on this a couple of years ago, and just giving some of the basic tenets of that. I'm not going to have anything going on that's going to require me for my attention to be split in multiple directions. So let's say, for example, if it's a group that's doing the beginnings of an Olympic lift progression, we don't go too far down we're not going to do a full clean and jerk. We're not going to do a full barbell snatch. But let's just say we're working our way up to hang power cleans is kind of the end of the continuum in our program. That's still one that I really want to watch. So is bench press, right? Things can go pretty wrong with a bunch of 15-year-old boys if we're bench pressing. I've got to have my eyes on those 7 racks. So 7 racks in our room. We have 7 cables, independent pulley system cables. And then we've been really fortunate. Our summer program funds our facility. We have 7 sets of power blocks, so dumbbells from 5 to 90. In the middle of the room, we have some space with some extra things we can do for boxes. But going back to that basic tenet, whatever else is going on the backside by those dumbbells or by my cables, I've got to be able to have my eyes on the front side of those racks. If it's dumbbell single arm snatch, I want to make sure what's going on in the rack is something that's fairly low coaching intensive. So like a trap bar deadlift, would it be great for those to be getting done better than worse? Yeah. Things aren't going to be going horribly awry compared to a power block flying across the room if somebody's not in a good position for a single arm dumbbell snatch. So right off the bat, supervision is key. Managing what's going on at one time, trying to make sure that if I have available assistance, so in that group, I'll never be by myself with more than 42. I'll really try not to be. I think that's the number one, to ease the concern. We talked about parents' concern about safety. If you get hurt in my weight room, I'm not going to be able to counter that with going like, yeah, but did you notice how much better I got their rate of force development? Like, if you break your arm in my weight room, you're going to have an angry mama or daddy, and rightfully so. So something I tout is that we've had very few, no serious injuries and very few small injuries in our weight room in 18 years. So supervision is number one. Organizing space, organizing what exercises go on. I had a question the other day from my assistant and asked, why wouldn't we do this here instead of that? And it was just, going into the weeds of exercise selection. And I go, simply because of space, like purely logistics. So if you looked at my program, you might look at that and go like, why are we doing that? And I would have to say, you have to look at what's happening in the room, and that kettlebell drag for some anti-flexion, anti-rotation, whatever you want to call it, right? Works really well because it's a low yielding exercise for me to coach. The space is available for that, and it just fit better than other things there. So the best exercise? Maybe not, right? But contextually, it works well for us in that group. So I have to laugh a little bit when I hear other professionals talk about how deep they're going into Tudor Bompa's work of periodization or Melsif's super training. And I'm like, you can tell you're not training very many kids, right? Or very many athletes at one time. Compared to what I do, there's a lot more people. And so, it's all context specific of what's happening in the room.
So with exercise selection, it depends on the space. What's the secondary criteria?
Yeah. So then I'm going to go back and we're going to really kind of fill in a template of 6 to 7 basic things if we're talking about strength and power development. And we're going to try to do something that's total body explosive, right? We're going to try to really create some rate of force development, some explosiveness. And again, depending on the group, that might be as simple as counter movement vertical jumps. It might be medicine ball slams. Some of my more advanced junior and senior level athletes, or even sophomores, might be getting towards some hang power cleans, some single arm dumbbell snatches. So right off the bat, if I'm going through simple categories, total body explosive, whatever that might look like. We're always going to squat. And this is when I was going to make sure I qualify. Like, I'm not a huge fan of a barbell back squat simply because of what we talked about earlier, right? If I have to supervise 56 kids, 65 plus kids, my eyes are in that rack. There might only be 14 of them at the time doing that. Things can go horribly wrong pretty fast, right? An ugly back squat gets ugly. So, but we're from a bilateral squatting standpoint, we'll go all the way through goblet squats, some sort of landmine variation potentially. But we're a fan of front squats. Our trap bar deadlift a lot of times ends up looking more squatty than hinge deadlifty. To use those, I don't know if those are real technical terms, but you get what I'm saying. So we'll squat, whether it be bilateral or unilateral. We're going to do some sort of knee dominant movement pattern there. Along the same lower body lines, we'll do something that's more hip dominant or hinge dominant, and potentially single leg or bilateral, 2-leg. We'll do something upper body push, upper body pull. Depending on the block of training, we'll change planes of movement with that, unilateral or bilateral. From there, again, I talk a little bit about the next categories. If we've got time and we've got space, I love carries. I think there's a lot of bang for your buck. We're talking about fundamental levels of strength, and we talked about grip strength. Depending on the variation you're using, I think there's a lot of value in some of our rack carry positions, overhead carry positions, bottoms up for shoulder stability, higher levels of core stability. So we'll carry something through there. And then from there, if I went 7th category, now we would start talking about maybe filling in some of the gaps depending on the group I have. If I have a class of, I'll use, for example, strength and conditioning level 2 male class. It's going to be a lot of football players. It's going to be a lot of wrestlers. There's just 2 sports that have gravitated towards the weight room and my program for a variety of reasons. The nature of the sport coaches at my school are very supportive of the program. So boom, category 7 right there, we're going to protect our necks, right? We're going to be doing some isometric neck work against a physio ball. Just kind of the filler things in there. That would be the extent of the quote unquote sport specificity. But at the same time, there's also going to be a soccer player in there. Can we have too strong of a neck for a soccer player? I don't think so. Lifelong fitness, we know the value of having a strong neck in a car accident, right? Protecting myself against the demands of life. So everybody in there would still do this physio ball neck exercise. And I wouldn't stand on this podium of saying, well, this is football strength and conditioning, or here's wrestling strength and conditioning. We're going to be doing some internal, external shoulder rotator cuff work. I think it's valuable for a lot of our people. I think it's valuable for even if we went down the other end of the continuum of going, like I have a cross-country kid and then runs distance in the springtime. Why would we be doing that with him or her? Well, because they're still going to end up training their upper body to have a total body level of strength and improve their running economy. I think it's valuable for them to be strong from head to toe. And if we have awful stability in our shoulder, it's going to be hard for them to master some of these big compound movements of pushing and pulling. So again, I'm not going to stand on a soapbox and go like, here's our swim specific strength. I think, again, at this level, and if we're staying true to what we're trying to do in the weight room, sport specificity is loosely, at best, shoddy. It's at best iffy. I'll go with that.
How's the, not to put you on, not to like, not to critique you or anything, but how's the performance of the kids with their specific sport?
Awesome. Yeah. I'm pretty proud of saying this. I'm pretty proud of saying, in our weight room, we hang shirts on the wall of the kids who have gone on to the next level and completed their collegiate careers. And 18 years, I couldn't keep count of it right now. It's a decent sized facility, and we've got quite a few shirts hanging on the wall. And then on the other end, we have the professional wall. We have a young lady who won an NCAA Division I title at Stanford, McDonald's All-American. She's playing overseas professional basketball right now. Mo Black is probably my biggest follow or boost in follows on Instagram. She's an elite level jiu-jitsu competitor, and I still actually train her virtually. I still train her. She was a second graduating class at Discovery Canyon. So we're adding shirts all the time. And I do say this, and I'm proud of this. There's not another wall in our school. There's not another wall of kids who went somewhere else or didn't train and then went on and did well. There are a few. I can't tell you that there's not. There's some kids who have had a very niche sport and have trained with other people and have gone on and done well. But it's not a massive amount of shirts that are hanging on our wall in our weight room. So I'm real proud of that. I think and the programs that have realized that have bought into that. But the beautiful thing about working at this age with this age group is I don't have to overcomplicate that, right? And I'm cautious to give myself too much credit to that. I've always said, I think if you're going to be a strength coach and you're going to pat yourself on the back for wins, you better be ready to take blame for losses, right? And we go back to those pillars of athletic performance and go, I can't control a lot of those other 3. I dabble a little bit at best in the psychological side of it, but technical and tactical, a bad sport coach can ruin a lot of the things we do in the weight room. So yeah, but to answer your question, it's been good. The kids that have bought in and done those things have realized a lot of levels of athletic success.
Yeah, going on a tangent too. Well, I actually looked up the school, and there was a lot of you guys are award winners. Like, that's a lot. Yeah.
It's a school where the expectation of success, not just athletically, academically, is high. I think as coaches, we're always striving to do more, right? And we have a couple programs in a little bit of a lull right now, and we're putting our heads together and figuring out how to get out of there. But we've seen some pretty successful individuals and teams.
Yeah, let's go back to training your 65 or your 82 athletes. Time management. How do you do it? Because what we do here at the gym, right? We have like the brief, the whiteboard brief, and then we have the warm up, and then the workout, and then the cool down, and then that's an hour long. How do you do it with your guys or with your students?
Everything's on a timer. One of the things when people come watch me work, and I'm open to coaches coming and watching me. It's funny because they walk away, and one of the things that I get a lot of is like, oh, what's that timer on your phone? And I just have a simple timer app that says set 5 seconds till set 5 seconds until rest, 1 minute transition, and our kids are on the timer all the way through. So I know exactly how much time I have. Obviously in a class, it's set for me, bell schedule set for me. But if I have an 80-minute class, 90-minute class with 5 minutes change out on each side, and I work my way backward into that and going, we got to get all of these movement categories covered, plus our speed and agility work, because that's something we haven't even talked about yet. Movement is its own separate piece, whether it's a linear speed day or a lateral speed day. And I have to account for that in there. So on the minute, when somebody comes in and looks and goes at 9:27, we need to be on front squats. I'm like, yeah. And if we're at 9:28, I know that towards the end, I've got to cut off a minute, whether it be our recovery and our regeneration circuit gets cut down by a minute, or I got to zip it up and get those kids out, changed out because they need to get to lunch on time. And I'll be looking at that, referencing that timed out sheet of going like, okay, I'm right on the money right now. I was supposed to start trap bar deadlift at 11:23. It's 11:20. We're starting at it right now. I got 3 minutes. I can talk a little bit more about sleep hygiene at the end for 3 minutes. So time management is another really big piece. I would probably say second in line to supervision, especially when we're talking about our training our big groups.
Yeah, it's the same thing for us. Is we have a really tight schedule. Like I personally just skip the general warm up when we're just doing squats, right? Like You can warm them up with specific squat warm up, so something like that. How about dealing with rambunctious kids?
This is part of the job, right? And I think it's one of the things that makes I don't know if scares people away from working in the high school setting or working with youth athletes. I'm trying to think back to when I started. It's been a long time, 18 years. I'm trying to think back. It had to have been more of an issue then. It rears its ugly head more sometimes, more depending on the class. Again, I think it comes back to setting expectations early. So right out of the gates, when kids come to me, I'm going to let them know there's 3 big things that we have to do. I say, number 1, you need to be coachable. You're in here to be coached. Like, it's not going to be an open room. A lot of our kids now work out on their own. It's funny. We're seeing this resurgence of interest in fitness and more specifically the weight room. And it's funny. I think it's due to social media. I think it's due to TikTok and Instagram, right? Like, I hear kids in the background talk about like, oh, I did a leg day the other day. I'm like, oh no, we're training today. But back to the point, they're excited about this. So when I come in, I got to let them know like this is going to be different than when you went to Lifetime on your own. You're here to be coached, so be coachable. Put your yes on the table, we say a lot of times. Lock in. And they used to say dial in, but now kids are saying lock in. So I got to be relevant. I got to keep up with the times. But I'm like, you're going to be focused up here. When you're spotting somebody on bench press, your hands aren't off to the side. You're not having a conversation with the rack to the left or the right. You are locked in. Your eyes are ready to go, and that goes to everything. Then give me your best effort. And I tell them these big 3 things are not suggestions; they're orders. Colorado Springs, military community, a lot of our kids will understand that verbiage there of like, okay, I've got to do these big 3 things. I say, after your infraction, your first one of those, we'll have a quick conversation, right? Everybody has a chance. Second one's going to be a little bit more stern of a conversation. There won't be a third. You're gone. So I get to say you're off sitting to the side. I got a lot of support from our counselors who set kids' schedules. And they've been really willing to be like, this young man or this young woman had multiple infractions and wasn't able to do this. It's a safety concern at this point. They're no longer welcome in this program.
Can you give me an example? You don't have to
tell you the kid.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah,
no,
you don't have to put them on blast.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had to. Again, like first order is me coming up and reprimanding. And depending on the infraction, depending on the kid, depending on you have to have your finger on the pulse of how you can approach this young man or young woman. Some of them are going to respond to a very stern first warning. Some of them not so much. I ultimately do want them to correct the behavior and stay in the program. So first warning, like, hey man, you're not locked in. Hey, when coach came over to you, when my assistant came over to you to correct you on this, you rolled your eyes or you tried to give them the reason for that. That's not being coachable. Or I'm watching you not touch your knee to the ground on front foot elevated reverse lunge. It's in my head now because that's one we're coaching a lot right now. And after your first prompt, you didn't correct it. You're not giving me your best effort. And a lot of times, because again, I've set the tempo. I'm fortunate enough to have been around long enough that some of our results help gain some trust and buy-in. A lot of times they'll make those corrections. Sometimes it doesn't work, right? Second time going through there, I'm going to have to reprimand a little bit more stern again. And now if it continues to be a problem, a lot of times I'll ask an athlete, not a lot of times, it's happened very few. I'm very fortunate that I'll ask them, hey, maybe you're off to the side today. Maybe you need to watch this one. And then again, there's been very few of those, but I have had to ask athletes to leave the room. I have had to have phone calls, call home, talk to a counselor. I try not to involve a lot of other people. It's my room. It's the buck stops here. I got to get those behaviors in line. So yeah, those are some specific examples of some things that I've had to really correct because ultimately I want to maintain a culture of effectiveness, efficiency, but most importantly, safety.
Do they talk much in the gym? Or, I mean, it's 80 minutes.
Yeah, we have a class. We have different types of classes where there'll be some classes where like we are really dead today because they're locked in, right? The music's playing and it's a group of. I'll just give an example, not to be too stereotypical here with gender, but a group of young boys, and it's a class right now that we're managing. It's small. It is a 28-person class, but I have a qualified assistant with me. So she's taking a group into the wrestling room. I've got a group of 3 of them in the weight room. There's no partners. They're just loading their bars, grabbing their cables, grabbing their weights, going to work. And there's some times where I'm like, all I hear is bars and music. It's kind of cool. Like I personally like it. Follow up that later that afternoon, I've got a group of 28 young ladies coming in. They haven't seen each other all day. They're buddies. It's going to be pretty chatty, And so depending on what's happening between the chattiness, if they're chatting and giggling and throwing a little dance because the music of the day is more to their liking, but then they're getting under their bar and they're doing a good job, I'm going to let it slide, right? I'm going to give a little bit of give and take. I think it's a balancing act as a coach, as you know. If they're getting chatty and then they're getting to the point where those big 3 things aren't getting done, then I'm going to have to scale it back and remind them, like, ladies, let's do a better job. That lock-in piece is not being done well. So. Yeah, it just depends. You might watch a group one morning. You came and watched me one day and be like, it's a very different group from second hour to fourth hour.
That's interesting. How about the tracking their performance or their reps or their sets? Do you have an app or, because like for us here, when they're done with the workout, they get to put their scores online and we can see the performance. And like at the end of like a cycle, we can see, an example, we can see we did a squat cycle one time. And there was like a lot of people. I think it was like 70% people who PR'd.
Yep.
So we got a way to track them, the data.
Yep.
How do you track their performance?
Yeah, currently right now, and for several years now, we've been using Train Heroic. We've always used, and we're currently still doing. Each kid individually has their phone.
By the way, this is not sponsored by Train Heroic.
Right. Yeah. So
and would like it to be one day.
Would be cool. Hey, Train Heroic. Yeah. Right. So they're using their phones. They're using the mobile app, Train Heroic. We have gone to being a no device school. So when we rolled that out, I was like, oh boy, do I need to buy iPads for every rack? I was dreading that, or kids knock over the things that hold their phones. Let alone, so I was like, I don't want a kid dropping a $700 iPad. I'm assuming what they cost, but right now they have their phones. What I've done to make sure that we try to ensure that we're not losing focus or that we're not on phones for things we're not supposed to be. We're only supposed to be on Train Heroic. Is there's only going to be a few exercises in a given session that we track. So for example, day 1, strength and conditioning 1 right now is doing trap bar deadlifts. There's a spot on the rack where they can place their phone or their laptop. If they don't have Train Heroic, they can use their school provided laptop, and we have an Excel file in there for them, and they'll track their performance on that. So that's the easiest way of explaining. There's also a place in there for them to track their vertical jumps and their flying 10-yard dashes. So those are 2 of our performance metrics, if you will, versus our strength metrics, trap bar deadlift, bench press is still in there. As much as some other performance coaches might scoff at the idea of being on your back and it not being very functional, I would agree. I would agree with the argument. But kids love to bench press, and it's an easy one for us to kind of give them, one for you, one for me. Right? They don't love front squat, so I'm gonna give them bench press. So
They got to do front squat.
you got a front squat, right? Sometimes you got to have your vegetables before you get your ice cream. So we use Trainer Oak to track that. Some kids use their school provided laptops to track those things. I'm still in the process of continuing to look at that. I think there's going to be a lot of value into some of these schools and school districts eliminating phones. If that happens, I've got to get creative. I may have to go back to where I was 10 years ago when we had our binders out and a paper and pencil tracking through there. I don't want to do that. Trainer Oak has been nice for me as a coach to publish a workout that has specific programming variables, right? Specific load management in there. This many reps, this much weight, track your progress. It's been nice. So it's been a way that we've been able to leverage technology to help make our jobs better.
Yeah. So how about let's talk about plyometrics, because you wrote a chapter in the NSA book about plyometrics.
Yep.
How about give us some of the guidelines, and you don't have to give a lot of the information that's on there if you want us to go buy the book,
yeah.
But maybe 3 to 4 concepts
Yeah,
that
for sure.
most of us regular people can use, or coaches who are about to coach high school kids.
Yeah. Good question. Yeah, so a little bit of background on that. The NSCA's Guide to High School Strength and Conditioning, I believe that's the title to it. And I was asked to write the chapter, like you said, on plyometrics. And to be honest with you, they just assigned us chapters. They're like, here's the list of chapters, and we're going to assign you one. So, I'll be honest, I was like, plyometrics, I feel like we do a pretty good job with that. I've had a lot of really instrumental people in helping shape my philosophy on plyometric training. Lauren Landau has been one. I'm just going to credit him right now and say, even before he was the head strength coach for the Denver Broncos, when he was the performance lead at Landau Performance and Stedman Hawkins, he's now at Notre Dame, and he is still a tremendous resource for me. But early in my career, I was able to go up and spend a weekend in I believe it was called a performance mentorship program. And he laid out a lot of fundamental concepts in plyometric training. And it was different to what I would expected, right? We tend to think of plyometrics as rate of force development, power, right? Cool stuff. And the reality of it is that is part of the piece. But force management, to use a Mike Boyle term, is really what we're doing, whether we're creating force or controlling force. That's our job. And a lot of injuries come from the inability to appropriately absorb force, control force. So a big tenet of our plyometric program is exercise selection geared towards that area. How well do we land? Right? What's our deceleration capabilities like, whether it be on both legs, one leg, multiple planes? So I stole a lot from Lauren Landau on the exercise selection piece of that. So right off the bat, exercise selection within the context of progression. And I think with young athletes, or maybe even here, I would venture to say if a 45-year-old walks in and the last time they were involved in an exercise program was in high school, which would have been in the 90s, might not have been very good if it was like ours, it might be you having to teach them, how do I land? How do I control this force, right? Generating force might be easier and more natural for them to do. But if they're not able to control that force, then that's something we need to start with. So in terms of exercise selection, it also marries up with progression and where we're at. All the way down that continuum of now us starting to create repeatable levels of actual plyometric exercises. Because let's say, for example, right off the bat, if I'm teaching you a snap down or a controlled landing drill, it's not really plyometric. We're not utilizing the stretch shortening cycle. And so by strictest definitions, it's not plyometric. Getting down the continuum of us generating force while also controlling it. Now we're talking about maybe repeatable bounds, right? We've moved from 2 legs to 1 leg. We're utilizing that stretch shortening cycle, and we're really encouraging them to generate force very quickly and repetitively. But we also still need to stick those landings, right? I still want to enforce great joint control and positions to help solidify that idea that like one of our best abilities is your availability, and training to reduce the risk of injury is a big tenet of our program. So that's a big tenet of plyometric training as well. Moving into next guidelines, we talked a lot about volume. We talked a lot about exercise prescription. This is one where I feel like a lot of coaches still misappropriately apply plyometrics. And I still hear stories from our kids that'll come back from a a club coach, another sport coach, and we did 100 broad jumps the other day. And I'm like, you've exceeded the number of foot contacts that I would have done this month yesterday.
They watch too much High Rocks videos.
Too much high rocks, too much whatever, right? And just again, maybe just a sport coach for whatever reason filled his or her time with jumps or bounds. And so volume was something that I talked a lot about in that chapter and referenced resources of people far more intelligent than me saying like, here's the number of foot contacts that we recommend within a given session and week. I would recommend people looking into some of the stuff Mike Boyle talks about. I used a lot of Mike Boyle's work in designing strength and conditioning programs, foundations of strength training. I know I'm probably getting the titles of those books wrong. He's everywhere, right? He's on social media. He's I actually reached out when I wrote this chapter, and he was kind enough to get back to me. And Lauren Lando and Mike Boyle were big influences in how I designed a lot of our programs, and then ultimately what I wrote about in the book. Measuring intensity with exercise selection would be another tenet. So we have volume, we have intensity. Intensity is a little harder to quantify, of course. It's more rooted in the exercise choice. Obviously, a double leg, a jump, which characteristically is what we would call a two-legged movement, is going to be less intense than something single leg, a bound or a hop. So, garnering your progressions in terms of volume and intensity, that was a big component. Flooring surface was a big part of that, right? Anytime we hear about
what's flooring,
so what we're doing, what we're jumping on,
okay.
Right? Our surface. I should say surface is a better term for that, because then sometimes the kid will come back and be like, "Oh man, last night we did bounds up the sidewalk outside," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, one of the most intense versions of our plyometric program we could do on the worst surface, right? Like we're going to be fried. We're going to be beat up." So, going back to, I think what we first talked about, like being strong enough, conditioning those tissues to handle the stress of what's going to be thrown out of them. Cause I can't control what that coach decides to do. It might be a out of building coach. It might be a club coach. It might be their dad, mom, being strong and resilient in those tissues to handle maybe misapplied training concepts and training principles. So yeah, those are four of the big ones in there that I felt like I spent some time unpacking in that chapter.
Let's talk about the progression, because I know like we don't want people to be looking at videos and say, "Oh, I can't do that," right? Because you said you do it within the context of progression. Can you give me a specific example where, let's say, they're a beginner, this is the scale, intermediate, this is the scale version, and then advanced, this is what you want to do?
Yeah, for sure. Let's just take let's stick with plyometrics and stick with rate of force development and before that control. So block one training, for us to be able to control our landings, we'll literally just have them stepping off an 18-inch box and getting into a great landing position. So no plyometric involved in there, right? It's simply that eccentric phase, cutting down that amortization time if we wanted to get real technical, get into a great position, building resilience in that position. And we'll stay there for a couple of weeks. So in our programming, exercise rotation and selection doesn't change, but every couple of weeks. Big changes every 4 weeks. I've changed that since really in the last few years. So we'll stick with that for 3, 4, sometimes 6 training sessions. Next progression out of that will be coming off of a seated position in an 18-inch box, where we're just coming out of a seated position, feet hit the ground, and immediately go into what essentially is a counter movement vertical jump. So now we're still trying to take a little bit of that amortization phase out of that by coming out of a seated position. We'll work on that for a little bit. This is within the context of a workout. So in a large group, our plyometric progression will look a little bit different. But if I'm just saying, I'm giving you like a snapshot of what we would do plyometrically in one of our rows in the weight room, right? This is what's going on in front of our power blocks compared to what's happening on the other side of the room. So next block and a half of training, seated to vertical jump. Then we'll have them stand on that 18-inch box. I think it's 18, maybe 20. And they'll take a drop off, a depth drop into a counter movement vertical jump. So that's a pretty big step. Some of our athletes, again, this is where it goes back into having our finger on the pulse. Larger athletes with maybe an injury, or athletes that just aren't very strong, we'll keep them on a progression longer before they move up into the next, or we'll regress them. From there, I'm trying to like go back in my mind and looking at what my progression on that. So we gone off of a depth jump in there. We'll take that maybe into a consecutive jump Now we're talking about reactive strength, right? Coming off the box, doing a second jump, because ultimately a lot of sport is repetitive. A lot of sport is that second jump, that reactiveness. So reactive strength in there, if you wanted to really get technical, reactive strength index, we play around with some of those testing modalities with that as well. So double jump on that. Now we'll take it into multiple planes. So now they're going from 2 legs from a jump in place to a broad jump. Broad jumping is actually a lot more aggressive. This is something from Lauren also, right? The forces of the shear force of the floor coming back into your body. We better have established some resilience in that position before we've gone into them. So again, when I hear about, we did 100 broad jumps at my 12 and under soccer practice, I'm going, oh no. But so broad jump would be next, consecutive broad jumps. And now we'll start moving into some single-legged work. Now we'll start talking into whether it be hops or bounds, right? Bounding being from one foot to the opposite foot, repetitive bounding from multiple planes. And that's kind of the extent of our lower body plyometric progressions. Again, some classes will stay in some of those blocks longer. Some classes will show up to me and I'm like, these guys were ready to go. We can jump in on block 2. And then maybe get into some more weighted jumps or some cooler things, right? Some of those 17 and 18-year-old boys have been with me for a while, and so they might not start with that counter movement or that step off and stick the landing. It just kind of depends on the group.
Yeah. You mentioned volume as well. Was there a point where your programming saw decrease in performance because the volume was high and then you made adjustments?
I'm trying to remember what we used to do prior to me really digging in deep to Mike Boyle's recommendations on volume. I'm sure I made a lot of mistakes as a young coach. I got to remember back when I came into this thing and my extent of my knowledge was working with high-level athletes, and it was a bad combination of being ignorant and arrogant. And I'm sure I overtrained a lot of kids. I couldn't even tell you what our volume was in there, but it probably exceeded what my general guidelines are now of like no more than 20 to 25 foot contacts per week, right? Or per session, and no more than 100 a week.
20 to 25 foot contacts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how I would measure volume. I think that's probably the easiest way for us to quantify volume with plyometrics, at least for me it is looking at foot contacts. And I won't, if we're doing some real low amplitude drills, I won't even include those a lot of times into that 20 to 25. But if we're bounding, those count, right? Those are going to count towards my total amount of foot contacts per session per week. So yeah, I think I'm sure there was obvious examples of when I was just overdosing volume, especially in highly neurologically demanding exercises like plyometrics or Olympic lifts or heavy CNS work, right? So yeah, I think I'm sure I made a lot of mistakes in there.
Are you dosing them with maximal strength?
Yes and no. Maximal strength for me, a little bit of a gray area, right? And recently there was some interesting back and forth. Again, not to continue to mention Mike Boyle, but he was talking a little bit about like some of the pushback from social media of the recommendation for kids to lift heavy or women to lift heavy shit, right? And so it's relative, right? Depending on I don't know that we necessarily have to have 1 to 3 reps to be considering maximal strength per rep range. We can make the argument that if I have a 6 RM in my hands on a trap bar deadlift or in a barbell, that's heavy. Because there's so many kids in the room of varying abilities, dosing maximal strength I'm pretty cautious with. We do 1 rep max at the end of a semester with a group that I feel confident with. But I was telling a group the other day, like the heavy day is coming. It's not going to be today. It's not going to be tomorrow. It's at the end of our semester typically, if that. A lot of times at the end of the semester, let's say, for example, in the spring semester, if my goal was for us to 1 rep max, but it's also the same week of state track championships, again, somebody can make the argument that we're going to be more safe in a low rep range with one rep maxing. I love that you're shaking your head because I'm like, I don't love that argument. And it's going to be a hard sell if something does go wrong. Meaning, if you hurt your back on a 1 rep max trap bar deadlift, the sprints coach is going to have a real hard time with me explaining, technically they weren't under a lot of fatigue and a set of 10, he's not going to want to hear that. I heard his best sprinter or her best sprinter. So Very rarely. Yeah, to answer that question, very rarely. I've had kids come back to me that are working with other trainers and go, I don't want to lift heavy today because we're maxing tonight on deadlift. And I go, we haven't got to deadlift yet. Like, you've been on a kettlebell center deadlift. Tell me more. And they tell me, like, with my club tonight, we're maxing on deadlifts, or we're maxing on this. And I'm going, we haven't got there. Like, you don't do that.
Yeah. For us, like, we love maxing out too. I mean, everyone likes
Sure,
because
yeah.
you see the numbers and
Yep.
it's going up and
Yep.
up. But the thing that I, especially at this stage of my life, it's the recovery. I mean, you max out deadlift one day, you're trash for 4 days. I'm like,
100%.
ooh.
Mike Israetel had a good point pretty recently and was like,
Man, we follow the same guys.
yeah,
I love Mike
he's
Israetel.
good, man. I'm 45, and he said something in a YouTube video pretty recently. It was like, stay away from anything under 5. I think it was 5. And I was like, oh, man.
And
I still like it.
And he was a power lifter,
yeah,
right?
Here's
Like,
a strong man.
Yeah.
Right? Here's a strong man. Boyle's got similar recommendations of, like, I don't think our clients 40 plus need to be in that low range in there. Again, I work with young athletes. I work with kids with a lot less miles on them compared to us, but a lot of times maybe not, right? If they're coming from, our kids sometimes will play multiple sports at the same time. They'll play their high school sport, and then they'll go practice with their club in the evening. And that's it's relative to their ability, the volume they're being exposed to. So dosing maximal strength, going back to that question, very rarely. I use it very diligently. I'm very cautious with it. So, the nice thing about our tracking system is that even if let's say we do stay kind of in that with our strength-based movements. I love Andy Gelb, his recommendations of 3 to 5 exercises, 3 to 5 reps, 3 to 5 times a week, 3 to 5 minutes of rest. I like those. We don't give that much rest, but I like some of the other stuff. Our tracking system will show a kid when they've done a 3 rep max, right? A little trophy pops up. And so there's still some of that same feedback and motivational awareness of that. And I didn't have to 1 rep max them, right? They can look at that and you got a trophy at a 6 rep max today. And that feels good. They like that.
Yeah. Let's transition to myths. We skipped this one, but I think this is a good segue because there's probably a bunch of myths in strength and conditioning for high schools, plyometrics in general. Can you give us like a few that just that keeps popping up in your profession?
Yeah, I had one just the other day. I had a kid say, well, I'm going to go to baseball specific strength and conditioning. I'm going to go to swimming specific strength and conditioning. And this is just going to sound mean. Maybe.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's go. That's marketing. That sells. If you think you have an elite level swimmer, baseball player, soccer player
At 16.
at 16, you come to me and go like, we're going to do general physical preparedness, right? GPP. That doesn't sell well. And if I'm charging you an inordinate amount to train your child, I've got to market myself. And so I think that's where that still comes from, because we know some of the leaders in the profession. Mike Boyle, again, so sport specific training is a myth in the weight room. Energy systems, that's different, right? Our energy systems are specific. But what happens under a barbell, general strength capabilities, power capabilities, movement qualities, that's general. So I still hear that one all the time. I got to go to my swim specific strength and conditioning. I got to go to my whatever, you fill in the blank. I mean, even football, even one of the sports that used to be the most raw, right? Bigger, faster, stronger. And we have people in town who are marketing themselves as we're training for football. So that one pops up. That's always going to be a challenge. I get it. I'm not a businessman. I chose public education, and my wife works in marketing and advertising, and I think it's.
So she knows that
she knows. Yeah, if you're out there talking about this is going to make you better at this sport, and you got to train specific for your sport, and we design sport specific programs, it sounds cool. And if you're trying to gain a perk from a parent who's going to pull out their pocketbook, then that's what you got to do. I think it's nonsense. I do. I really look at that one. That's the biggest one. We don't hear as much anymore about getting slow from the weight room. That's nice. I'm glad that one's gone.
In fact, you get more explosive.
Yeah. We know now that it's good, that it works well. I think depending on the type of training, I want to go. It's not necessarily a myth, but a challenge right now. We talked a little bit about, Instagram and TikTok. Kids are getting excited about looking a certain way. And so I've done a lot of education, or I'm doing a lot of educational pieces to talk to our young men and women that hey, training like this fitness influencer is not going to be the best way to leverage your athletic performance, right? Staying within the confines of general physical preparedness, but saying like 10 sets of 10 on the hip thrust machine is not going to help you play better volleyball. The fitness influencer you saw do that has one goal in mind: look a certain way, gain a certain amount of followers. And they're probably doing a lot of other things that they're not showing you on their video. There's filters in there. Let's just be honest. There's drug use.
Drug use.
So that's one that's maybe not a myth, but a challenge that we're dealing with a lot right now is training for performance versus training purely for aesthetics. And I love the adage of like, you shouldn't train to look better. You should look better because you train, right? Everybody's going to get an opportunity to be done being a competitive athlete. So I tell my boys, like, hang in there. You'll get to just, you'll get to do an arm farm workout. We throw some buys and tries in at the end. There will be a time when you are done competing, when you get to just train for aesthetics. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I think there's a tremendous value. Dr. Lane Norton does a great job of explaining that muscle is not a vanity issue anymore. It's a health issue. So, to not to belabor that point, but that is definitely one that's popping up a lot. Sport-specific training, and then training like the gym bros and the fitness influencers.
How about the girls that they think
Train different?
They think they're gonna get
too bulky?
They're gonna get too bulky.
Yeah, okay. You know what? It's less. We're getting less of it now because of what we talked about earlier with the fitness influencers. I feel like we're getting less of it. I think it still exists, and I got to be cognizant of how I approach. For example, if I'm talking about putting on size for my guys, if I say putting on size, I need to be a little bit more diligent at using language that's going to be more conducive to them being like lean muscle mass, right? Resting metabolic rates will be improved because of improvements in lean muscle mass. And that's going to maybe draw a better connection to what they would want to look like and what they're desiring to do. But yeah, there's still some of that, maybe more than I know. I'll be honest with you. One of the areas I'm really trying to extend myself and getting better with, not very successful at this point with it, is better reaching our female athletes. So that's definitely one that probably still is pervasive. I'm really fortunate that two of my assistants, the woman that's also in the department, is an avid strength trainer, still looks very feminine. So is my full-time assistant from the NSCA right now. So they're in the room. I'll have them demonstrate an exercise. And I'm hoping that ends up being something that the women can draw a connection of like, oh, I can still look like this and lift heavy weights. Great. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that one up.
And they're not on drugs.
Right. And those two are very much natural, no filters, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
How did you make your name in the high school level? Because you're one of the top strength and conditioning coaches here in the U.S.
So I'll say I appreciate you saying so. I think it's a loose term to say I won an award with the NCAA, the High School Strength and Conditioning Coach of the Year 2021. I think I think there's a lot of men and women working the setting that I would say that are better than me. It's a loose award. I'm grateful for it. I'm humble by it, but. To get my name out there, I really think early on it was just to be honest with you, I was doing a good job. I put my best foot forward. Word got out that our kids were training there, that we're doing a great job staying safe. They told their buddies. Our program grew. We started with freshmen, and then we grew into what I think is probably still the largest high school strength program in the state, especially with our school's not very big, 1,200 kids at the high school. And I was mentioning earlier, we got a couple hundred kids working out every summer just at the high school, 350 plus with the campus. So it grew because it was working. I'm proud to say that the people got on board to help me out, and it wasn't all me. It was I've got some great sport coaches in the building. Had some tremendous support early on from administration. So the program got some attention. People started talking, and then I extended myself to be involved at a higher level. I was trying to hold myself accountable to try new things and get challenged. I got involved with the NSCA's high school special interest group, and that helped. Get me asked to be the contributor to the NSCA's Guide to High School Strength and Conditioning, the book on Plyometrics. Trying to think of other things in there. Got the podcast with the NSCA. Those are a lot of the things that helped me stand out. But I think ultimately early on, it was showing up and doing a good job, right? Putting my best foot forward and really helping create a program worth notoriety, worth notice. So, yeah, I hope that answers a little bit of that. And I've scaled back a little bit on some of the extra duties. A little bit after the pandemic, I started recognizing, I knew, especially coming back out of COVID when we were shut down, I was like, I'm really going to have to rebuild this thing. I'm going to have to put my best foot forward and get back to doing a great job on the floor, and step back from some of my involvement with the NSCA, step back with some of my involvement in doing other things, and started sharpening my craft a little bit, right? So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm grateful that you reached out, because now I'm starting to get back into networking. And to be honest with you, I'm starting to look at the next phase of my career. I'm 18 years in. My youngest son is at Discovery Canyon now in the 6th grade, and I'm looking towards what's next. I really feel like as they start transitioning out of school, I'd like to maybe try this in a different area. I'd like to maybe look into the tactical space, and I'm extending myself into trying to meet people. I'm excited to go meet some people next week and talking to some others. So try to not to dovetail too far off your question, but that's what helped me stand out. I'm ready for what's next now.
Can you explain doing your best?
Yeah, I think early it was easy to stand out. I came in full of fire and laid expectations. They're talking about my big three. I've had those big three from an early age, and I just took this real serious. I really did. I thought I looked at it like I worked really hard to get the high school job, because it didn't exist. I had to. I was here subbing. I was here personal training. I was working at a GNC. I was working as an adjunct faculty member down at CSU Pueblo. I was driving down there and teaching exercise classes as part of a health disparities grant in church basements. Because when I left the University of New Mexico, I passed up on other opportunities to stay working in Division I strength and conditioning. I was really passionate about wanting to make this work at the high school level. So when I got that opportunity at Discovery Canyon, I was like, don't mess this up. I really held myself accountable to do a great job with this. No easy days. Step in, do a great job, and be the best part of every one of these little freshmen's day. So I know that's kind of speaking in generalities, but there was no days where I was sitting back on my chair, coaching from a seated position, right, or writing stuff on a board and then walking away. I still see that too often, and and I hear people get frustrated with these kids these days, and I go, well, is it the kids in your room, or can we point those fingers back at us? So early on, I was I held myself accountable, and that came from my parents, that came from wrestling, that came from a lot of influential people in my life. Just if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. So early on, just showing up and doing the best job I could.
When it comes to tactical stuff, you're talking about operators, right?
Yeah, so it's a wide range, and I'm still really new into this right now, so I don't want to speak too out of turn on this, but watching some of the people work with our police, our fire, and then obviously our military operations, and hearing them talk about how incredibly rewarding it is. It feels a lot like it felt for me 18 years ago when I was getting excited about working with high school kids. And just the payback of, this could potentially be the most important thing to them. I heard one of the gentlemen working for Performance Code, Michael Schofield, I went and visited him this last summer, and he said, I want the best person showing up on the scene in an emergency. He works with a lot of fire departments and police in the Denver area, and his following, his Instagram presence and LinkedIn presence, they're doing some really cool things. So I'm excited about it. Again, I'm just in the very, very infancy stages of exploring and learning more and seeing where this could potentially take me, but it feels very similar to what it felt like 18, 19 years ago with going like, hey, what's this high school thing like? And there's more opportunities in there right now than there was with high school 18 years ago, but it's still somewhat in its infancy. It's still growing. So yeah, that's about as much as I can say right now, because like I said, I'm just learning about that right now.
Thank you for listening to this episode with Sam Melendrez, one of the top strength and conditioning coaches in the United States. I'm Clint with Parabellum Athlete. Subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you next time.